through the desert, and I was feeling a little overstimulated and dehydrated and exhausted. And this thought came to me out of nowhere, that my friend Daniel was in the Orange Hookah Dome, and he would give me tea. So I walked in the general direction of the voice said, and as I came around the corner, there was this giant 3-story Orange Hookah Dome, which I'd never noticed before. And when I stepped inside, there he was, my friend Daniel Pitchback. And he sat me down, and he was very kind to me, and he gave me a hot, steaming bowl of tea. Do you not remember that? It's all right. It was crazy. So when the night of the burn came, I was like, bring it on. I was like feeling very excited about everything. And so when I lost all my friends, like I should have had faith, but I didn't. I just felt really grumpy, and like I'd expected some real magic that night. But here I am by myself, and there, you can just feel very isolated out there, even when you're surrounded by 35,000 people. It can be a little intense. And so I stopped to see the fire spinners and then ran into this guy who had seen me spin fire 2 weeks before. And he said, "Why were you crying?" And in New York, if a stranger asked you why you were crying, you would just be like, I wasn't feeling good. Like, you would never just have a moment with a stranger. But this is Burning Man. So I said, well, ever since my mother died, there's just this loss inside of me that's very deep. There's this grief that's inside of me, and when it gets tapped, it just sort of spills out. And he said, your mother died? And I was like, yeah. And he said, will you come talk to my friend? And I said, sure. And he led me through the crowd, like away from the heat and the light of the fire, this dark corner of the desert, and there was this really little girl, and she was curled up in a ball, and she was crying hysterically, sobbing. She looked a lot like I'd looked about a week before. And he said, she's been like this for hours, and nobody can do anything. And I said, okay. And he was like, Stephanie, this is Catherine. Her mother died too. And she stopped crying, and she looked up at me, and she said, when? And I said, about a year ago. When did your mother die? And she said, 3 months ago. And I said, how old are you? She said, I'm 19. And I said, well, tell me exactly why you're crying. And she said, well, it's just that I feel so guilty. And she went on to tell me about why she felt guilty, that she was in college and her mother wouldn't let her come home from college to be with her, just kind of like my mom wouldn't let me quit my job and come home and take care of her. And sometimes they fought. And she just couldn't get over it, thinking about how they fought, and that she was scared, and she sometimes didn't know what to do or what to say for her mother. And I heard myself telling her that she was 19, and that 19-year-olds are supposed to be in college, and that 19-year-olds are supposed to fight with their mother. Like, that's almost like your job description when you're 19 is to fight with your mother. And that, and that she had to let this go. And I said, look, can't you see that, you have to remember that something happened to you too, that you lost your mother, and that's a huge loss, and so of course you were freaking out, and of course you maybe didn't act like yourself. And do you really think that your mother would want you to be here tonight crying? And don't you think maybe that if I found you here tonight, out of all these people, that maybe your mother sent me? And in that moment, I felt the strangest thing. I felt this presence with me. And sure as I knew that Daniel was in the Orange Hookah Dome, I knew that her mother was there. And then I felt something even crazier. I felt another presence there, a presence I hadn't felt in a really long time. And it was of my mother. And it was exactly the way everyone described it. It was like she was right there. And I just basked in it, that feeling of her being there. And I realized, really that she had been there all along. I just hadn't known it, that it was all my feelings of guilt and craziness that were pushing her away, not letting her in. And that by forgiving myself, if only for a few minutes right there with Stephanie, she had come back to me. And when I left Stephanie, she was asleep on the playa. And I walked out into the night, and I felt this lightness that I had not felt in years, like not really since before my mother got sick. And in a way, the story ends, but there's a tiny coda I just have to tell you, which is 2 months later, I'm back in New York City, and it's crazy again, New York, and my job, and blah. And I'm sort of feeling far away from the magic I found out there. And my friend Johnny calls me up, and he says, come march with me in the Halloween parade, and I don't know, and I'm busy and work and blah, but I'm like, fuck it, I'm gonna go. So I throw on a crazy costume, and I run down with him, and as we're walking through the parade, and I looked at it today, it's like 2 million people, like 50,000 people walking. He's like, how are you doing? And I'm like, well, I don't know, that grace I was granted on the playa, I feel like I'm losing it a little bit. And he said, well, I don't know how to get it back. And he's like, well, maybe just by coming out tonight, you're taking a step in the right direction. And I thought, that's true. 5 minutes later, I hear someone call my name. And I turn around, and it's that guy. It's the guy who saw me spitting fire and who found me the night of the burn. Right? And I'm like, what? And he's like, what are you, and I'm like, what are you doing here? And he's like, well, we were in Chicago, and we thought, we're just going to jump on a plane and go to New York for Halloween. It's Halloween. And then we weren't even going to go to the parade, but then we decided to last minute, and we came down here. And 5 minutes ago, we snuck past some cops and jumped over the barricade and joined the parade. And I was like, we? And I looked behind him, and standing right behind him was Stephanie, the girl from that night. And I looked at her, and I was like, hi, do you remember me? And she said, yeah. And I think she was a little shy, and I was feeling a little shy too. And I said, how you doing? And she said, I'm doing, good, better, much better. And I said, yeah, me too. Thank you.